modern ufology really began about 1947?
Yeah, it really did with the Ken Arnold sightings. But now there's been a lot that happened before that. There was a recovery, I think, in 1941. I think in Arizona, and there was a lot of activity during World War II. But really, modern ufology started in 1947 with the recovery. Well, first with Ken Arnold sighting up in Seattle, I think it was, and then the recovery of the craft in Roswell, New Mexico.
Well, I'm not familiar with the Arnold sighting.
Well, the Ken Arnold sightings was when he saw those 9 discs flying through the air. He was out on a search and rescue mission, and he saw these discs. And when he landed, the reporters wanted to know what he saw, and he said, "Well, they look kind of like saucers," and that was the first coining of the term flying saucers.
Ah.
And this happened like in late June of 1947, and coincidentally, just like a week later, was this recovery of the craft in Roswell.
Well, I say modern ufology. Really, there have been sightings, I suppose, for as long as man has been around to record them, haven't there?
Yeah, at least there's just hundreds of references in the Bible, and before that, Chinese and Indian records record saucers, up to 4,000 or 5,000 years ago.
Okay, now to Roswell very quickly. I interviewed the author of the book, The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell the other day, and he did a pretty good job of documenting what I guess is, would you say it is the best documentation of something that has happened?
Yeah, it probably is, other than, of course, well, no, that's right, it is.
It is. And I know you've looked at Roswell. I guess it's probably one of the first things that you studied when you jumped into all this. What kind of conclusions did you draw about it, John?
Well, at that time, in 1985, when I first got in this, I think there was over 200 witnesses that were still alive that had either touched or loaded or seen the craft and the bodies. And a good portion of those people are still alive now, but there was just overwhelming evidence that this occurred.
Because I was a security officer, I had to go inspect it. They told me it was sensitive cargo there. It come by truck.
Was it in transit, or was that...
It was in transit.
It was in transit, all right.
I'll tell you how I knew that. Now, I went in and I picked up the tarp, and I saw this body. Of course, I turned a little bit. At first, I thought it was a young, baby or something. Then I got a little bit turned, like you do in combat. When something like that happens, your stomach gets upset, but you recover fast.
Mm-hmm.
And I told the sergeant, get out of here because it's a area. I don't want you in trouble. Go out to your post, and I'll be out in a second. I put the tarp back down. Now, this only lasted 10 or 15 seconds.
And what do you recall seeing? You say you saw a body, Colonel.
I saw an extraterrestrial, skinny arms, skinny legs, under 5 feet, had a fairly large head. Not large, but compared to the body, it was large. And the eyes, they were slanted eyes. No nose, no mouth, no ears. And it was floating in some liquid, and it was a gray color. And that's what I saw.
I'm sure you know all the questions that people would ask if I started picking up phone lines now. So what about being inside that craft? What do people generally ask, and how do you respond?
Well, first of all is the overall description inside. Entering the craft is, like I said, certainly uncomfortable for an adult human being.
You realize that you're not in a place that was designed for humans.
Exactly. And it certainly is different from anything that you're familiar with. And what I mean to say about that is everything is basically one color. Normally, any area you're surrounded in is always different textures, different colors, so on and so forth. The inside of the craft is essentially all a dull pewter aluminum color, very metallic looking. Mm-hmm. There are no sharp right angles anywhere, and the description I've given before is basically the craft looks like it was just injection molded, essentially like the model was. There are no seams anywhere. Everything inside the craft looks like it was fashioned out of wax, heated for a short time, and then cooled to where everything basically melted into what was next to it, what it was sitting on. That's about the best description I can give as to how the inside looked.
Seamless
and very unusual. Again, no right angles anywhere.
Laying there, he realized that this was not a human being at all.
Not a human.
And he described it very similar as to what the girl described, a creature that was about almost 5 feet in length, with a large head, a thin neck, brown, oily-colored skin, no body hair, no facial hair, no mustache, a tiny little nose.
And he gave it to you in that detail?
Yeah, in that detail. And, I'm glad you asked that, because at this point, his demeanor began to change, and you had to sit there as a witness and watch this to completely understand the emotion now that was filling the room, because it was only a short time after this. I mean, it was easy to realize these weren't rumors. He was the guy.
Yeah, I've got it. But in terms of this wasn't human, but apparently it had what we would think of as a leg, and it was obvious that there was a bone.
Yeah, so it was a broken leg with the bone sticking out through the skin.
So we know already that the metabolism is fairly similar to that of human beings in some ways, right? The construction.
Yeah, we went through a lot of detail, which I don't have time to go into at all, but I'll mention a few things. I asked him about the blood and the bone. I said,
right.
What's the blood like? Is it blue and, jumps around on the floor or what?
Yes.
And he said, no, the blood is very similar to human blood, even with the cellular constituents. With one large exception was that there's a set of little small white cells called platelets. And the platelet reading, he said, was about 10,000 times higher than in human blood.
Wow.
And that it clotted almost immediately as it came out of the blood vessel. But he didn't know whether this was due to increased platelets or whether the blood was being exposed to an atmosphere that was different than where this thing had come from. He said the bone was, again, very similar to human bone, except it was a little more pink in color. And then it contained what is called medically lacunae. And these are holes or apertures that are in the bone. He said it almost looked like osteoporotic bone, which in human is a diseased bone, which the calcium drops out and has holes on it. But he said because of these internal lacunae or holes or apertures in the bone,
yes,
the tensile strength of the bone was much, much stronger than human bone. And, he knew that what he had to do was to, of course, put the bone back, set the fracture, and so on.
Yes.
And at some point, he said he lost control. And that whatever was happening was that whatever was laying there was controlling the movements of his hand.
But this was a little different. She took off and she was barking, really, really barking. There was an anger to the tone. And she went up a hill in front of me, and I lost sight of her. And I could still hear the barking going on. And the barking changed from just chasing something to almost being involved or being mauled by something. And at that point I thought it's either a cat or a bear. And so I dropped my backpack, I grabbed a branch that was alongside of the trail, and I ran to the top of the ridge where I saw my dog involved with a fight with a creature. And what I saw was a vibrating, undulating surface that looked about the size of a small child but yet it wasn't a child. And it was vibrating so fast that I could not see a definite outline of this being. I could just barely make out the shape, as if it was a vibrating shadow. My dog had a hold of its arm, its left arm, and was tearing at its left arm. And as I witnessed this, all of a sudden I saw this thing like start to tear the head off of my dog, literally tearing her head, her jaws apart, ripping her skull right in half. And at that moment, that thing turned around and looked at me, stopped vibrating for a moment, and then turned back and continued to do this. And I lunged forward, took that club or branch, and swung as hard as I could and knocked that thing about 4 or 5 feet back.
In August of 1997, 2 very experienced investigators were on this ridge that overlooked the property. They were up there specifically to monitor an area where those stuff had been happening in the previous weeks. So they were there with a purpose, and they had their equipment. Nothing had happened pretty well all night up till about 2 a.m. and they were just packing up. They were looking down at the area just before heading off home, when one of them spotted a dull yellow light. It looked like a sort of a small reflection off glass near the ground, that kind of thing. Nothing to notice. But then it started getting bigger and bigger, and so they decided, okay, well, let's unpack the equipment and have a look. So one guy took his camera out that had infrared film in it. The other person took a pair of Generation 3 night vision binoculars out of the bag and started monitoring what was going on below. Through the night vision binoculars, he saw this 3-dimensional tunnel. The actual light that had expanded to about 4 feet in diameter now through his night vision binoculars looked like a 3-dimensional tunnel. And in the tunnel he saw movement. Now, at the same time, the guy who was taking photographs could only see this 4-foot diameter dull yellow light down there. He could not see this 3-dimensional tunnel. And through this tunnel, this large black humanoid was crawling. It crawled out actually through the tunnel, got out of the tunnel, and vanished into the night. It literally used the shoulders to emerge from the tunnel. And this guy was watching this through night vision binoculars.
Hold it right there, Colin. We'll be right back. From the high desert, I'm Art Bell.